Welcome to the Mrs. R Relevant Daily Draft Podcast, sponsored by the Draft Professors. Today, joined with Draft Professor Owen McCullough. Owen, it's good to see you. Jerry's not here. We are still going to plug away and get through some offensive linemen. What did you think about the group that we are going to discuss today?
Yeah, I mean, Jim, long time no see. Didn't just go back to back with you on the podcast for an hour and a half just a couple minutes ago. But I liked this group. I think overall there's players that I'm high on, and we talked about that. I gave some hints of that in the podcast we just got done recording. Some players that I think I have like low grades on, but I really like elements of their game and would like. They're players that I graded low, but you're going to hear me say like I want this guy on my team in the 6th, 7th round if I can get him there. And there's gonna be guys that I think I'm consensus lower on in this group. There's a good mix of like ranges of dudes that I think that I'm gonna be able to get some different takey takes out there, like hot takes, and as well as just some good information about some players that maybe you don't really know a ton about, but after you hear when your team ends up taking them, you're like, okay, I can live with that description of a player, at least from a rookie right away.
Yeah, and it's interesting because like this group was a group of players like we weren't planning on doing. I think this is like the 8th podcast. I think I only had 7 planned. So I had to like stretch and take a group of players and divide it into 2 podcasts. But actually in doing that, I think we've uncovered a lot of good players that are going to be day 3 players, but we need some time to talk about them. So
yeah,
these are the players that we're going to talk about today. Josh Braun from Kentucky, Keegan Truss from Missouri, Fabichi Nuewu from Oklahoma, Matt Golbin from Michigan State, Sam Hecht from Kansas State, Alex Harkey from Oregon, Fa'ali Fa'amo from Wake Forest, and Trevor Gooseby from Texas. So the first player we're going to talk about is Josh Braun. Do you have 6'6", 342?
That is exactly what I got. I'm assuming you got that from PFF as well.
I did, yes.
Yeah, so that's where I'm going to be getting all my measurements from as well. So I do think that is where I'm going to get. If we're going to be same, it's going to be because of that.
Okay, and what else did you have on Braun?
So Braun, he played guard. Correct me if I'm wrong. I know you haven't listed here as tackle, and it's 6'6", 342.
Yes. I copied the wrong slide. I did occupational hazard.
Yeah, no worries. I was just saying because I read that, and that was kind of my first impression when I saw 6'6", 342, and I was like, okay, that's a big dude. We've seen those types of players coming out of Kentucky, especially at tackle. I forget the name of the dude. He was like an absolute monster, like 6'8", 350 from a few years ago. The Commanders took him. It didn't end up working out, but I think Braun is a guy that I'm going to be low on with his grade, but there are aspects of his game I really do like. He's just a mountain of a man. You see those measurables, and he lives up to that stature. And the way he plays the game both lives up to that billing and also kind of leaves you wanting more. So for me, his strengths come in pass protection, and especially when it comes to just being a brick wall in the middle, and that's what you kind of want from your guards. That's your most direct path from a pass rusher to the quarterback, is being a player or being up that middle and having a player that can be as big and imposing as Braun and can anchor down against power and has some legitimate, good technique when it comes to his hands and fighting, and as well as using his feet to kind of shuffle and move. And it's a good thing that he isn't a tackle, because I think if he was, we'd be saying a lot more that he works best within a phone booth, the way he plays that guard, where there are some plays where he's getting beat for pressures where you're getting some more athletic D tackles that can really go and attack the edge, and they're fanning out their rush lanes to give him space, and that's where he starts to struggle. But against a team that's going to have your typical one techs or a nose where you can help chip on it and double, you're going to be seeing him really stand up to the test when it comes to guys trying to work through him and eventually collapse that pocket. He's going to be able to hold that shell. So as a pass protector, I really did like him. What was kind of disappointing was you don't really expect him to be a move blocker in the running game, but you want from a guy that size to be able to move some bodies around, be a people mover. And there was a lot of plays where he just kind of left me wanting more from him in that area, where he can get some good blocks and square guys up and be able to clear out a lane or two on occasion. But for me, it was so much more inconsistent than a guy you want to be doing that at that size. So for the balance of being a good pass protector, just because you're just big, imposing in a wall, and being a not so run blocker, I didn't really love his overall game. That's why I came out a bit lower. He's in my around 6 or 7 range. But as a guy that you draft, store as like a backup guard, he's come in and be a pinch hitter, especially if like you can put him at starting at guard for an injury. And you come into that week knowing, okay, we're going to have to pass the ball a bit more. We're going to have to operate our offense a bit differently to kind of mask his weaknesses. But he is a dude that I can see sticking as a depth offensive lineman in the NFL, and especially for teams that are going to really value some of that more clean pocket, maybe a more pocket passer type quarterback. You don't want that pocket to be collapsed up the middle. You're okay with them stepping up. He'll be a guy that you'll have more value in than, say, some other teams that require some more moving pockets, mobile linemen, especially in that interior 3.
Yep. So out of all the players that we're talking about today, is Braun the lowest for you?
He is, yes. It's not by much. He's actually right there with one other player we will talk about today, which is probably going to be the surprise of the podcast for that player, just based off of what I've seen other people talk about. But for right now, he is the lowest graded one of this group.
Okay. So the next player, Keegan Truss from Missouri. And now I have to clarify, is he a guard or a tackle? And I forgot to update that screen too.
So he plays tackle at Missouri, and I ended up grading him out as let me just double check before I say anything. I don't know. Oh, I graded him out as a tackle, and he does have some height and size that I can definitely see, and I've seen. I was debating which way I was going to grade him initially when I was watching his film, because 6'4", 316 definitely seems like a guy that maybe if he doesn't work out at tackle, he has those measurables and the kind of lack of size or lack of length to move into guard. And that is present in his game with his lack of length, and especially in some reps. And I do think that could be a potential move in the future. He just hasn't really done that at the college level. But speaking of the college level, he is the rare 7-year senior. He played in 2019, and then 2020 was a wash year, and then 2021 he was playing since 2019. He's my age. We are the same age, and he's just about to graduate up to the NFL level. And that was really the thing that held me back a lot when it came to his grade, because other than that, like, he shows what staying in school longer does for you. Now, he's to the large, like, super extent being a 7-year player. But he's a guy that is technically refined in his hands and his feet, able to square up, mirror match, defend against pass rush moves, using his hands to knock away blockers, has those feet that he's never going to be out of control or away from where guys are going to want to take their rush lanes. So he's really polished, and he's not super fluid when it comes to like his footwork and sliding, but he is solid enough that he can mirror match, especially when you're going against guys from tighter alignments. Other than that, I do think he has some good power in his game, and he's got some nasty, and to be able to like finish plays off. And he does have some movement to reach and get some, leverage on outside zone. But it's not like he's not a super great athlete. He's like a good, not elite type player. And speed will give him issue when he's trying to get depth. Like there's going to be some issues there, but for the most part, he is just this really technically sound, kind of like pretty good athlete, a tackle-worthy athlete at the NFL level. And like I said, power is there too, so he has all those elements. The only thing that's really holding me back is the fact that he is so old, and I had to drop his grade because of that. I found ways to kind of start sinking that in. That was kind of a blind spot for me in the past, where I wasn't really valuing that as much. But I think talking and doing this podcast with Jerry has really taught me that when you get guys that are that long in school and you're talking about their upside, there's not much more you're really going to get from his game. The fact that he's so polished is kind of an example to that, where if you draft Trost, I think he has starter caliber traits right away out of college. It's just going to be so much. You find other holes in his game? It's like, normally with players, you'd be like, okay, he can grow into this or he can grow into that. And Trost, that's not really the case. What you see is what you're going to get when you draft him. So I think if he was 3 years younger, even just like a 4-year senior, I'd be significantly higher than I am on him. But even then, I still have a low day 2 grade on Trost just because he is so technically refined. I loved his tape that much.
Wow. Okay. Loved hearing that. And are you saying Trost as a tackle at the NFL level?
I think if you want to maximize, like I said, with a lot of stuff where he's maximized when it comes to his technique and a lot of things you can see at tackle. What you're drafting is what you're seeing on film at tackle there at Missouri. If he moved into guard, I wouldn't hate that idea, and I think you could maybe untap or get some more of that untapped upside because he is changing position and you can find some more things there he hasn't really put on tape so far. But I'd be comfortable having him fail inside and start out at offensive tackle. He does lack the length, and I do think he will struggle there consistently against like some higher end edge rushers. But if anything, he's going to find a spot either as a like lower end starter or as like a really top tier backup type player.
Okay. And then I know from chatting with you on the other podcast, this is a player you like, Febechi Nuewu from Oklahoma. I had 6'4", 326 off of PFF. Is that what you had?
That is exactly what I have. And for me, Oklahoma offensive linemen kind of always scare me off. I've never been the biggest fan of them. I've been relatively lower on them in the past. They had that tackle, I think it was Guyton was Oklahoma from a year or two ago. I was relatively lower on him. There were a couple other guys in years past, since Creed Humphrey, I haven't found an offensive lineman from Oklahoma that I've really, really genuinely liked. And at first, I thought Nuewu was going to be like that because he seemed to be this stonewall pass protector where another guy shows really good mirror match with his hands and his feet, good technically, able to square guys up, have a good anchor. That 326 shows up in his ability to anchor down and not allow power through his chest. And all of his games that I watched against top-tier talent, like I watched him against, I'll pull it up real quick, Texas, Alabama, and I believe there was one other game there that I didn't write down. But against teams that have genuine NFL talent that we've covered on the Wednesday podcast with their interior defensive line, and he's holding up against all these guys in pass pro. He rarely ever got beaten by defenders. I think PFF has a stat called BD, beaten by defender, for offensive linemen, and you can sort that and watch the film where PFF has deemed that he has been beaten by a guy, and he has 4 of those reps across the entire season at Oklahoma, which I can attest to. That's probably all the times he's gotten genuinely beat by a pass rusher in true pass sets. And one of those, I believe it was Auburn with Keldrick Falk, and another was when he played center against LSU, where he came in for like one game, had to snap the ball, didn't really look as comfortable there as he did at guard. But for a guy that moves really well, great athlete, especially for 326, being able to get out in space, I was worried when I saw I didn't really love him as a people mover. And that's kind of been my criticism of Oklahoma offensive linemen in the past, is they're kind of these undersized, fluid guys, but when it comes to pass pro or run blocking, they don't really have that power element to their game. But he does enough to be a neutralizer in the run game, and he's able to anchor down and also excels when it comes to outside zone stuff. So I think if you're running a very specific offense where you're running a lot more zone blocking and then just sprinkling in the more power elements, you could grab him and have a day one, pass blocking starter at interior offensive line. And depending on the scheme you have, I think you could plug him in day one and play him right away and just live with some of the warts you get from that run blocking.
So I would be curious if the rep where he got beat against LSU was Bernard Gooden.
I'd have to double check.
So that was a defensive tackle. I don't think you and Newt got him because he tended to grade low. But if you like Santana Hopper, I think Bernard Gooden is a SEC version of that, of Santana Hopper. Right. They have similar size profiles. I'm curious if that was the LSU lineman that beat him.
I have the rep in front of me right now.
Yep.
It was a linebacker. What the play was, he got moved to center against LSU, and he had a nose tackle lined up head up on him. And the nose tackle crashed left, and he struggled to pick up the delayed blitzer on the right. Now, it didn't end up in like a sack or anything. His right guard was able to come over and pick up the backer, but it was just kind of a late pickup. And that was kind of what I saw throughout the rest of that LSU game was while he was at center, he just didn't seem very comfortable with some of the ID of who was coming where, kind of the IQ part of the center position, which playing it for the first time in your career at the college level, I think not surprised by it. But that was the one rep he got beat, according to PFF, on that game. Okay.
So, and is your grade on Nuewu early day 2 or just day 2?
He's in the round 3. He's in that same grouping with me. I can double check. I have the names around him, but I want to make sure I have.
So
the
you
exact
right around where you have Mo and right around where you have Rutledge, right?
Yeah, he's with Rutledge, Emmanuel Pregnon, and J.C. Davis are the ones that are close to him in grading wise.
Okay. So I did not realize you had a third round grade in J.C. Davis. So
yeah, I definitely liked him. I definitely got to do some more revisiting.
Okay. Okay, so another player that we were talking about in the last podcast that I don't think a lot of people are talking about, the Michigan State center, Matt Gulbin. What do you have on Matt Gulbin?
Yeah, so Gulbin is a guy that I can definitely see why he's not getting as much conversation. Just the Michigan State team in general struggled this year, and you can tell that a lot of the guys on that offensive line weren't really up to par with what Gulbin was doing. But if you're looking for a center that's kind of, I think he's middling or kind of average as an athlete overall, but he's doing that while also being kind of an all-around type player where he's a fine athlete and can do some plays where you see him get free releases to the second level or get out in space for screens. And you're like, okay, he can do that on occasion. I think some better, more highly athletic linebackers, like if he tried to do it to Arvell Reese or some of these other guys that we've covered, he's not going to be able to dominate those level of players that he does some of these other guys in these games that I've watched him do that in. But it's a skill set that's in there that on occasion he can execute. But he also has the power, he has the nasty, he has the meanness, where he's gonna be a genuine people mover, move guys out of the spot, even though he's only 312 instead of like the 326 we saw with Nuewu. He's got that edge to his game that really translates some of that power and that muscle he has. And he also is just a smart player. So like in pass protection, he's able to anchor down, take dudes on one-on-one. I would like to see him be a bit more consistent with his hand positioning and not being able to get his hands knocked off, which is going to be a theme with another center prospect we'll talk about in a second. But I think he's a bit better when it comes to keeping his feet underneath him and with him and anchoring down once that does happen. He's just a bigger bodied guy that knows how to use that, has that ability to throw it around and leverage that in the run game, and has some sneaky athletic traits to his game where he's kind of just this all-encompassing all-around player, but is going to lack a lot of upside. Kind of another guy who is going to be a high-end backup, lower-end starter. It's just not in as important of a position as compared to like tackle, and we talked about with Trust earlier.
Okay, so I'm assuming your grade on him is like round 5, 6, 7.
Yeah, I think around that area would be where the sweet spot would be for him.
Okay. Next player who, if I understand correctly from the last podcast, you're significantly higher on than Gulbin. What do you have on Sam Hecht?
Yeah, so Sam Hecht, he's going to be more towards straddling that line of like early day 3. If a team is running the scheme that Hecht is going to match into as a 300-pound flat center, you can kind of guess where we're going to be going with this. But if you run that specific scheme and like these kind of players that still, despite not having size, are gritty and will dig it out and do the things right and execute properly, you're going to see him maybe get floated in for a team in a late day 2 if they really like that and they really need a pivot position. But pure grade wise, I have him in the early day 3, solidly round 4. For me, Hecht is a player that great athlete, and you'll see a lot when it comes to interior offensive linemen. Why I have Hecht graded higher than Gulbin is because when you're going to be, especially at center and at guard, to a lesser extent, but still more so than most other positions, you need to be able to get out of your stance and have explosiveness to your game. Because not only are you the ones that are going to be having to come downhill and clear out lanes and move these big monsters in the middle out of the way, and the best way to do that is by being the first to initiate contact and drive your feet through that point of attack. But also, when you're facing against these quicker, smaller, agile 3-techs, you need to be able to explode off of your base and react to change of direction a lot better. So when it comes to centers especially, I value athleticism a lot more than some of the other positions. So that's where the discrepancy between Gulbin and Hecht are, because I do think he's in the same boat with Gulbin as being very smart player, aggressive, able to carry. I think he excels his best when he's taking on double team blocks and helping out along his offensive line when in pass protection, especially when he's going like one-on-one with a nose tackle. His game against Big Citrus, you can definitely see this a lot in week 0, where he was struggling a bit one-on-one blocking in pass pro against a guy like that, where he knows how to use his hands, able to swipe away his hands, and his base will go with it a bit because he just doesn't have as much weight in that anchor. But when he's asked to just be that helper dude or help with double teams, or pick up a blitzing linebacker who's on the smaller side, he can definitely compensate for that. Great reach blocker, great zone blocker. When you're asking for a guy to take over for blocks, when your guard is trying to climb to the second level and you need him to take over and reach and maintain that leverage to the outside zone, Hecht is your guy there. So great athlete, good explosiveness out of his stance, smart, intelligent, knows where to be when to block, which is very important, especially for the center position, and is a guy that, despite not having the greatest power anchor, will still make up for it with some of that feistiness and ability to scrap in the middle there. So that's why I like him more than Gulbin. I wouldn't say it's significantly so, but definitely if I had my tiers, he's definitely a tier up from him. Just because I do think I value those specific traits he brings to the table a bit more than maybe the more all-roundedness that Gulbin brings.
Awesome. Love hearing that on Sam Hecht. And if my understanding is correct, I believe Hecht has accepted a Senior Bowl invite.
That should be exciting. I'm excited to see that there. He does. The reason why I don't have him like solidly in day 2, despite him having those traits, is because he's clearly and obviously just a center that can only work in specific schemes. I don't think you're going to ask him to be in a power block scheme. Whereas Gulbin, I could see moving to guard. I could see him working, as kind of maybe not a high tier starter in some schemes over the others, but working as kind of like a scheme transcendent player because he has more of that base in his game. Whereas Hecht is more specialized, more specific, but higher upside and just a better overall athlete.
Okay. So now we're flipping to the tackles of the day. So the first is Alex Harkey. He plays tackle for Oregon. I've heard some people say he should move inside, but I'm curious what your scouting report says.
Yeah, I could see that. He hasn't played a ton at guard. He's been mostly a tackle. He was a JUCO guy, ended up going to Colorado. I don't remember. I think it might have been when Coach Prime first took over and that like mass wave of transfers came in. He went to Colorado and then ended up transferring out after one season there to North Texas, played 2 seasons there before transfer to Oregon now for his first season there and only season he's going to get there because now he is a fifth-year senior, so he's out of eligibility. I think he played consistently right tackle at all those spots, so he's not even really scheme or side versatile with his experiences there. But he's decent. I do think he is a good player when it comes to just all-roundness. His experience shows up in his technique, similar to what we talked about with Trost, but he isn't elite in any one category. Like I feel like Trost was a high-level technician with some good athleticism and good power. Had that, not only was he showing that refinement in his technique, but he also had some athletic and power upside. Where Harkey, I wouldn't really call him high upside in any of those categories. He's kind of a middling athlete. He flashes good movement, but in short bursts and laterally reaching, he doesn't really pop off the screen as much. It's going to be where you go play by play, and you're like, okay, he held his own there. And there will be plays where it's like, okay, if there was a better athlete at that position in that rep, they would have been able to take over that block more successfully. And that's where those plays kind of pop up where you're like, okay, he's not as consistently there with his athleticism. He has size and he's 6'6", but he plays with like a lack of length, where I think maybe that's where you're hearing a lot of the talk about him transitioning to guard is despite being that size, and I don't know what his official measurements are, but he just plays with a lack of length in his pass protection and allowing guys into his chest and being long-armed and not being able to really get hands-on quickly enough or fast enough or at length and keeping guys outside of his frame. So that's where I think maybe I would lean towards putting him at the guard, despite the fact he hasn't really played it as much. When he does get his hands on you, though, he is good at generating some movement. Not elite or anything, isn't like a dominant people mover, but definitely has some power to his game. His best trait is just the fact that he is so experienced. He has a high IQ, some decent technique, and he knows how to just put his body in weight of position to angle off guys, whether it's in pass or in run games, where even though he's not going to make this dominant block or be able to hold it for long, he's going to be a guy that's going to be an obstacle for you to get to the guy with the ball, which, I mean, in the end of the day, is the job of those offensive linemen. It's just going to be how consistently dominant can he be in those reps and how consistent does that work, especially against higher level competition once you get to the NFL. So I think he's a smart backup tackle prospect. Maybe if you really need like a spot starter down the road and you find like as your like swing tackle, I think is where his upside is going to be. Guard, I could see it, but at the same time, I think that's where I'd be the most comfortable with him as just like your primary three OT.
Yeah. So 2 questions on Harkey. So he is the fourth Oregon offensive lineman we've covered. I assume he is the lowest graded of the four for you.
Yes, he is between. So just to remind everybody, he's nowhere in the. He's not in the stratosphere of world.
Right, and then Lulu and
I like him definitely significantly more.
Yep.
And then I forget who was Pregnon from the transfer. Yeah, again, another guy that Pregnon's a bit closer to Harkey, but I do think he has more starter upside than a guy like Harkey does.
Okay. And then the second question. So Oregon is doing a really good job of, let's say, rebuilding its offensive line from one year to the next. If memory serves me correctly, Oregon had 2 offensive tackles drafted last year too.
They did, yeah.
So when it comes to evaluating and you see a player like Harkey who's only been in Oregon system for a year, was he being used the same way when he was at other schools, or is it a harder evaluation because he's only been there a year?
I think what you're seeing is he's being used correctly, and I feel like they're using it to his strength. So you talk about how the fact that Oregon lost those 2 tackles to the draft, and you can see that now with Harkey being a guy transferred from Texas State, and Isaiah World, who is the first-round talent on this offensive line, being a transfer from Nevada. So they grabbed 2 transfer dudes to replace those guys, and these are both going to be draftable players. So they're going to lose another 2 guys to the draft. I mean, they're going to be out of eligibility anyway. It may just be that they're trying to give their developmental guys some more time, and that may be where you start to see what they truly want out of these prospects. Because World and Harkey are 2 very different players. Like, they have the size and they have the ability to move. World exponentially more so than maybe Harkey is. But for what they both do and how they operate in that offense, you can see that they were targeted for a specific reason because Oregon liked that skill set. So I think they went and grabbed a guy like Harkey after watching him at Texas State and a little bit at Colorado to utilize him where he was best there and kind of optimize that by putting him on a team that has other good talent around him. So he's been this type of player, and I think even if I watched him in the summer with just Texas State film, I would tell you I'd probably be a little bit lower, but he has the opportunity to grow a bit more because he's going to another top tier school, and he's kind of fulfilled that to this point, which is a little bit of speculation because I didn't watch him this summer, but he just gives off that feeling having watched his Texas State film retroactively and on top of his Oregon film.
Okay. So another offensive tackle, Fa'ali Fa'amo from Wake Forest. I hope I did that name justice. He's a tackle at Wake Forest. I've heard a lot of people say he should be a guard. But what do you think?
So this is going to be the controversial opinion, I believe, in this podcast, because I am not his biggest fan. He is relatively low in my grading scale, and that's with him being at a guard as well. I think watching him at tackle in Wake Forest, you can just see, and there's guys you can watch, and you see 5 reps, and you're like, okay, that dude needs to be inside. The fact his feet are just really slow, especially when he initiates contact, but you see it even more, especially when it gets to him playing in space against edge rushers and trying to mirror and match in that more wide open range where edges have the opportunity to go outside or inside with even more space than you do on the interior. And he doesn't really throw his weight around as much as you'd like as an outside guy, despite being 317 and you're projecting him inside. So that's why I'm also kind of relatively lower when projecting him inside, because I do think that'll clean up his footwork a lot, where he'll be able to not have to deal with as much space, work in a phone booth, absorb contact, make guys have to go through his chest, which he does have a decent anchor, as opposed to work around him and utilize his technique and ability to move to block them. However, I don't really love his athletic profile when it comes to explosiveness. Like I said, his power, and it comes a lot from the fact that I said, like, his footwork is slow, even when initiating contact. When coming downhill on a down block, if you're not the strongest dude, if you're not Jonas Savnaia from last year, where you can just throw dudes around with your hands, you need to be able to drive your feet through contact. That's where guys like Austin Barber are able to make up for their lack of natural play strength, is by having quick, smart, trained feet. And he just doesn't have that right away, or at least initially coming out, despite being a 5-year starter playing at Washington State. So kicking him inside, I do think limits his negatives, going from maybe a player that I probably wouldn't even try to attempt to play a tackle in the NFL to a guy that I'm drafting. Maybe I can work some stuff out because he has experience as a starter. His technique is fine, especially in his hands. Again, something from a guy who's more experienced. You can draw some of that out. And moving inside allows you to operate with more of a window, thinking he has a higher upside. But for me, a lot of the stuff with his athleticism, with his natural power, with some of the technique that hasn't developed despite being now in his fifth year as a player in college, it kind of gives me reserves as to whether or not I would want to take a swing on him. He's one of the only guys here that, even though I have guys graded lower than him from this group, like specifically Braun, they don't. I would rather take a swing on Braun as an interior offensive lineman than maybe Fa'amo. I would.
It's interesting, and I found it interesting too that you brought up Sabanea, because I was going to actually ask you if you had to compare Fa'amo to Sabanea, what do they have in common as players or prospects?
Yeah, I feel like Sabanea moved. He's inside. He's playing guard for the Miami Dolphins. That's what a lot of people projected. I felt like he was quick enough and had a decent enough length when he was in playing length specifically to maybe survive as a tackle, but I could definitely understand why people had him as an interior offensive lineman. But he fell in the same category where it's like when he's trying to do true depth pass sets against speed rushers, that's where he struggled. And it's the same thing with Fa'amo, where guys that can win with speed are going to attack your outside shoulder, even if they aren't the quickest or bendiest dudes, but can still threaten that and then work some moves off of that. He's already behind the 8-ball when they're trying to attack that outside shoulder. So you really have the entire world open up to you when you do that to him. And despite that, he also doesn't really have, like I said, the strength or power index that Sabanea had, because Sabanea was just a natural dude that could throw guys around. And you're like, okay, if he went inside, I can trust that power, that natural strength to translate there. Whereas Fa'amo will need to develop a bit more technique with his feet for that to really be something that translates. So I wouldn't really be as willing to bet on him succeeding on the interior as I was so certain that Sabanea would eventually become a starter at guard in the NFL for the Dolphins.
Okay. I appreciate that. Okay. Now the star of the day, Trevor Goosby of Texas. And I'm going to ask you, is Goosby the best tackle you have watched in the last 6 months?
I don't think so. He was the guy, he obviously clearly the highest graded player of this group. I know Newt Weston shot me a text asking what my top 10s were for both offensive tackles and interior offensive line because he wants to start building his board to watch. And I sent him the list before I added in the guys I watched for tonight's podcast. And then I immediately was like, oh, by the way, you got to add in Goosby. He's a locked in first round grade. And when adding the position multiplier, he's a blue chip top 10 player. For me right now, though, his tape puts him behind guys like Caleb Lomu, Maui Noah, and Fano. So he's my tackle 4, which is impressive for a guy that had like 300 snaps last year, and that was the first time he got any kind of significant action. And then this year, you can see that, especially early on, like the Ohio State game, his hands were a bit of a mess. You could see the clear and obvious athleticism popping off the screen, the power, the ability to be like just this stud tackle prospect. But it's kind of behind this blur of rawness and inability to really reset his hands, set his feet, bending a bit at the waist. Like there's some stuff that veteran players are not going to be doing. Whereas even towards the end of the season, I think it was the Texas A&M game, the conference championship game they just played, he looked like a totally different player, like an absolute, like the stud of studs that you thought he could be. And there are still plays in there where you're like, okay, I can see the inexperience coming through, especially with like some play ID, blitz recognition, stuff like that, that's going to come to him as he develops more as a starter and gets more reps under his belt. But you're starting to see that elite, like blue chip talent emerge by the time you get to the Texas A&M game. So for me, he is, I'm going to make a comparison to a defensive lineman we talked about in the podcast before we hopped on here. Because they're in similar circumstances when it comes to their positions being a bit more stacked at the top, and they could go back. And if Goosby goes back, he'll be tackle 1 next year. I have no doubt about it. Similar to like a Helt from Clemson, a guy that high upside younger player. If he went, he's a good enough player to be a second round pick. Helt is, but if he went back, he'd be like towards the top of the edge class next year compared to where he is now. Gooseby is tackle 4 right now. Comes out, I think he should be a top 10 pick. But you go back for 1 more year, and then you come out next year, and maybe a non-quarterback needy team is at 1. You're the first overall pick. I have no doubt about it.
Okay. So loved hearing that on Gooseby. And then that completed the offensive lineman. So if memory serves me correctly, we've done, I think, 7 podcasts of 8 players. So like your offensive line board is about 56 deep.
Plus or minus some of the guys. I missed a podcast last week with Jerry, so I didn't get those guys done in time to really have solidified firm grades on them. Or I do, but I like to have them kind of wrapped up. These guys, I feel a bit more confident in what I was talking about because I kind of knew I was going to miss the podcast a little earlier on in the day. So those guys I still have to add. And as well, there are some other dudes on here that I have watched from the summer scouting process that I do need to go back and check to see if they're going to come out or if they're worthy of being on the full-on big board. But just counting up the numbers between the 19 tackles I have listed here and the 32 interior offensive linemen, that's 52 players right there. So that's how many we've covered so far from just these 7 weeks.
Okay, so now I'm curious. Who do you have a summer scouting grade on that we have not podcasted?
Just going back and checking. Colin Sadler from Clemson. I had a lower day 3 grade on him. He was a 4-year sophomore. I think because he had injury, redshirt, and a COVID year.
Okay.
I liked his ability to be like kind of a power blocker, and we haven't covered him specifically. I think it's because that Clemson didn't really do well this year, but he's a guy that I'm interested to go back and double check on, see if I'm even higher on him because I felt like he had some upside there. Who else? Ryan Linthicum, I believe is how his name is pronounced, from another guy from Clemson. These were guys that we covered in that first summer scouting podcast from Clemson. I think he's their center. Harris Sewell, another Clemson guy, I believe, the other guard, and he's the guy I've graded highest of the 3 of those. He was a 3-year junior, and he was a guy I'm especially excited to go back and check out to see how he ended up doing because he was the guy that I saw a ton of upside for, especially as like a man power block type player. And I think that's it for the interior offensive lineman we've covered. Yeah, definitely none of these guys that are higher up. And when switching over to tackles, Emil Wagner from Notre Dame and Blake Miller from Clemson are the only 2 players on the tackle list that I still haven't gotten updated film on from the summer scouting.
And I think Blake Miller was last week, which you missed.
Yeah.
Right. And then Wagner, I was told is a return to school. So that's why we didn't podcast on him. So that was just me checking. It's the process by which we, as draft professors, choose the players we podcast on. I'm just going to say needs improvement in communication because, right, I PR the podcast and stuff. So can't just decide today who we're doing next week. There has to be a runway.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
But I was thrilled to see how high the grades were on a lot of these guys because I didn't think we were going to get as many day 2 grades today as we did. So
I mean, I'm definitely higher. I think I'm definitely gonna be higher on Trost because even though I factored in the age into some of the grading mechanics I used, it still didn't drop him nearly that far. So I'm sure there'll be some people that are like, he's off my board, he's a 7-year player, or he's a round 6-7 guy because he's a player that's that old, and that's just not something that's as significant with me. Like we've seen that already with the Wednesday podcast. I'm pretty high on Mesidor. Last year, I was high on the D tackle from Toledo that I'm blanking on the name right now.
Darius Alexander.
Yeah. Like he was a guy who was like a 6-year player and that I was like, I don't care. I have him with the first round grade because he's a stud on tape. So a lot of these guys, especially when now adding in the position multiplier, they're even higher after that. But the fact that they are just good on tape, I'm willing to bet on that translating more so than worried about what's the second contract going to look like or how much can I really pull out of them at that point. So that's why I'm higher on Trost. And I think the other guy you said I was relatively high on was Hecht, I think.
Well, and ultimately, I mean, the last podcast had plenty of people that were high on Hecht. I don't think you're on an island with any of your grades here.
Gotcha. Yeah, I'm curious to see what other people think of Truss, because that was, again, like the Mesidor thing kind of surprised me when I came into the podcast. Newt said he was with me on the Mesidor thing, and I'm like, oh, cool, awesome. That just solidifies how I felt. And then we kind of created a civil war in the draft professor group chats because people were like, you can't take a dude who had 2 ankle injuries and is a 6th-year player at edge. And I'm like, but his tape is so good, though. Like, he's a great player at edge.
Well, and again, so I think this is the part of the draft that I find to be the most fun and why I love covering it, is because nobody's evaluation is wrong, right? Like it's you have your evaluation, somebody has theirs, and then the question is, when you're looking at your board in round 3 and round 4, if you don't like the board on, maybe you go with Mesidor. Otherwise, he'll be like an early day 3 pick because, hey, if you can rent a day 3 player for 4 seasons and get some use out of them, that's a good use of a day 3 pick, whether it's round 4 or round 7. So, like a player like Mesidor, he should be drafted.
100%, yeah. Even if he's not going to be as drafted as I have him graded, he's going to get drafted, and he's going to have a good few years there where people are going to be like, how did he fall to the 5th round like Braden Swinson did? And it's like, well, it's because there's this way or whatever. But yeah, the evaluation is still the same. It's just how you evaluate some of the off-field or other things in that evaluation where you kind of land with where your grade is. If I had to quickly shout out, because I know Jerry's here, I'll have him here in spirit, that if I had to pick out a player from this group that he absolutely would love, I'm torn between the 2 centers, because Hecht, I think, has that mentality and has that technician ability that I think Jerry would really like, but he is on the undersized, and I know he didn't really love. He liked Brailsford. He didn't really love Lou, but I do think maybe he'd be a big Gulbin guy just from his ability. He loved the Oregon center. He loves some of those guys that can really go out there and just be like that glue dude in the center position, the pivot, and also throw his body around and be a kind of a brawler. So I do think Jerry would, like, if I had to guess, Gulbin would be his dude from this group.
Yep. So we should have Jerry back on next week to do an offensive line big board with you.
Yep.
So we'll cover, how you have the tackles ranked and how you have the guards ranked and the centers ranked. But why don't you tell everybody about the weekly huddle and all of the other things that you do?
Yeah, I promised a plug at the end of this one without having to waste time on the plug at the end of the last one, because I knew I'd be right back. So, yes, so I'm at Twitter at The Weekly Huddle. You can find, sports takes, my discussions around prospects. I'm opening the Gabe Akis fan club over on the Twitter over there. I might make that my new handle is Gabe Akis fan club, because we love him. And if the Buffalo Bills took him in the 2nd round, I think I'd go do backflips in the snow if there was even snow on the ground in April. But you can catch me there, and also over on YouTube, where now that my semester is ending, I'm going to have a lot more free time to discuss things. I think we're going to make a video coming up either on Thursday or tomorrow. I'll record it early in the morning, where I'm just going to discuss the Buffalo Bills and where I think they should attack with the draft versus the free agency and how that kind of plays into team building. They're a good example of looking at a team and seeing where they have lack of talent on both sides of the ball, but one is because the talent hasn't panned out, and others because they're regressing because of age. And which way do you attack that with the draft? Which way do you attack that with free agency? And kind of how do you balance that? So I think that's the topic of my next video I'm going to make, and try to get back to pushing out some more video content on top of the live streams we're doing twice a week here over the Draft Professor.
Well, definitely tag me when you do that on the Buffalo Bills, because ironically, this Tuesday night time slot in January is going to be a Buffalo Bills Draft Professor podcast. There are enough Buffalo Bills people within Draft Professors between Owen, Randall, myself, Jerry Ostrowski, and we can get several guests to come on, that we're just going to have our own podcast.
Yeah.
Right. So, and among the things that I wanted to get into is exactly what you're discussing, right? It's not just, what's everybody's linebacker board or what's everybody's edge board, but how do you construct a roster when you're making the playoffs, but you also need to prevent the regression of your older players?
Right, exactly.
That's the theme of my offseason.
You can also, I'm going to maybe think about doing something a bit more spicy where I go through the season's almost over, and this is definitely going to be one for when the season ends, but I did a full-on predicted every game heading into last season to be able to do some mock drafts in the early fall and late summer. And I had a lot of people in the comment section of that video flamed me a bit for some of my decisions, and especially shout out the guy that was yelling at me because I had the Cardinals going 8-9 again for the second year in a row, even though they got significantly better according to him. But he was right; they didn't go 8-9 this year. They're currently 3-10. So shout out that guy.
Well, hey, so if we want to roast people's takes, I had the Titans making the playoffs this year on my initial simulator draft order. That didn't last long.
I had the Colts winning the division, and that looked like a genius play until all this happened.
I will say, when I saw how good the Colts were doing, I was hearing your voice echo in my head. True.
Because it was the truth. They had a great running game, good defense, and all of a sudden it just falls off because Daniel Jones breaks one of his legs and then pops his Achilles in the other one. Jonathan Taylor has a disappearing act. I don't know what happened there. Now we have Phillip Rivers. Maybe he'll save our season.
Yeah. So I want to take a moment and, first of all, thank Owen. We just went through 10 or 11 weeks of podcasting on positions. And granted, I mean, Owen, you've been podcasting pretty much since the last draft cycle ended.
Yeah.
So I want to give my sincere appreciation to you for podcasting twice a week while you are also working full-time, while you are also working on a master's degree. So, and you are the assistant, or you are the defensive coordinator for a local high school in Buffalo. So I'm appreciative for the effort that you have put in up to this point. And I look forward to seeing you on Tuesdays and or Wednesdays, even after we're finished here with the scouting reports and going into the January through April draft cycle. So I just want to give my thank you for that. And if you're watching this podcast and you're a fan, best thank you can give is to go to the Draft Professor Simulator, do a mock draft, and tag me in it on Twitter. You can tag me at NFL Draft Fanatic. No, I am Fanatic. So do a mock, post it to Twitter, tag me in it, and let's talk about it. That's what we're here for. We love engaging with our followers. So if you're enjoying the podcast, see if you enjoy the simulator the same amount. So for Owen, myself, for Jerry Ostrowski in absentia, for the 110 people at the Draft Professor, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you on a podcast again tomorrow.